Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting on all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Folks, please do tell us where you are viewing from. Please send in your greetings. Please send in your comments. Please send in your questions. And let's have a great show tonight from 7 o'clock until 8 o'clock. And at the bottom of the hour at 7:30, we have got the noted pro-Brexit author, Will Podmore, on. Now, Will is the author of two books, Brexit, The Road to Freedom, and also Capability Britain for a country that works. And that's Will Podmore at the bottom of the hour, ladies and gentlemen. So please do stick around for that. And just before, we'll also have our competition, which is for another one of these lovely little badges that say King Charles Coronation. And that will be after our On This Day in British History. So we'll be coming up at 7:30 at the bottom of the hour. So please do stick around for that, folks. And greetings to folk who have come in so far. Derek was first in tonight, says, "Good evening, Alistair and fellow Unionists around the world. I hope everyone is having a great evening, night or day, depending upon where you are." Now, Derek says he's sadly at work, so he looks forward to catching up after his shift when he gets home at 11 p.m. Well, Derek was actually down at the coronation and he sent us one or two pics. So let's put up a picture of the great man, Derek himself, when he arrived in London. There he is there in the middle, wearing his red A Force for Good hoodie and with matching trainers by the looks of it. And he appears to have bumped into a couple of coronation well-wishers there at the station. And what other pictures did Derek send us? Yes, Derek got right down there in front of Buckingham Palace and took that photograph of the media, which is quite interesting to see how they do it. Each have got their separate tents, and there's one there that's 2 stories high for the various news agencies. I wonder how much they pay to get those prime spots. Okay. And that looks like the GB News when he's maybe got a zoom on his camera. He's got right in there, and I see that's Alistair Stewart. So yeah, that will be the GB News tent. How they keep out the surrounding sound from the rest of the mall is a question, isn't it? But it must be something in their microphones that just are able to focus only on the presenter's voice and don't bring in any ambient noise. Okay. There he is, holding the phone over the marchers that are going down. That looks like it's at the bottom of the mall. And okay, and he's got right up close there to the guards. Now, people who know more about them than me will be able to tell you straight away what kind of guards they are, whether they're Scottish, Irish, Welsh, or indeed Grenadier. Maybe somebody will look at that and study it and be able to tell us in a moment what Guards regiment that one is. Okay. Good. Well, thanks for those, Derek. Thanks for those, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Debbie says, good evening, everyone. Wish Nippy would get arrested. Fed up waiting. I know what you mean. I know what you mean, Debbie. Who knows what's going to come of that, but it's going to drag on and on and on, that's for sure. Hello to British Legends, and to Mali, who says hey there, and to Harry, who says hello, AFFG and Unionists everywhere from the seaside county of West Sussex. Hope you're well and enjoyed the coronation. Well, it certainly was a historic event. Good evening from Elgin, says Stuart. And Kat says, good evening, tuning in from the great British cathedral town of Bury St Edmunds. Lovely part of the country, been in it a couple of times down there. Stephen says, hello everybody and God save the King. Adam says, what are our thoughts on the coronation? I enjoyed it, especially when they used the Welsh and the Scottish Gaelic and the Scottish Gaelic and the Irish Gaelic, which was the first ever coronation in history to do so. I liked that as well. I thought that it added a nice little British touch. It's quite good. I thought one or two of the innovations were very, very good, and tell me what you think about those as well. There was the singing, wasn't there? And then there was the other religions that were involved, which was probably quite a good way of making sure that everybody in society feels included in some way. Derek is watching from Armadale. And Adam says, AUOB recently shared a fake poll where apparently 92% of Scots backed independence. Yeah, but that would be a poll probably on their very own Facebook page, I should imagine, where they got the 92% from. And it is, as you say, desperate, evidence of how desperate the nationalists can be, and the people of Scotland are not stupid, that's for sure. Harry was working on Coronation Day, but I think the residents where I work loved it, so I'm guessing you work in a care home, Harry. Now, talking about AUOB there, they had a march. Hi to Ryan. AUOB had a march through the centre of Glasgow on Saturday. They had booked it last year for the 6th of May. They have a march every year in May, and the march this year happened to fall on Coronation Day. So what they decided to do was to turn it into a kind of anti-coronation march. Now, last year they got 773 people on their regular May march. This year, we thought, they're going to exaggerate out of all proportion, so we have to get it on camera. We have to get it nailed down, and we got a fantastic video of it from the very beginning to the very end, from a vantage point where you're looking down on them, and you can count them with ease if you've got 45 minutes of your time to spare, and if you've got the patience. And we did that, and there were 3,726 of them. And of course, if you were to try it yourself, you'd probably get a slightly different number, but we say to people, try it yourself and you'll probably get around about the same, within a 2% margin of error either way, which in that case is around about 80 people either way. margin of error. So you're looking at no more really than 3,800, and we, as I say, counted it precisely, and we got 3,726. So that's the fact of the matter, and the video is up, and anybody can count them for themselves if you go to our youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. It's up there, and it's also on our website, aforceforgood.uk. But of course, that did not stop the Scottish nationalists, again exaggerating out of all proportion. And the All Under One Banner people, they claimed 20,000. A prominent Scottish nationalist on the march with them claimed 25,000. Alex Salmond himself claimed 30,000. And the deputy leader of his party, Alba, claimed 50,000. That's 50,000. But of course, if you look at the video, it's not even over 4,000. In other words, the smallest estimate that they're giving, and it is an estimate, it's not a precise count, the smallest estimate is 5 times what it actually is. And we knew that this was coming, so what we did was we sent out a press release on the Friday to tell all the press, BBC, Sky, STV, all the newspapers, what we were going to do, and to look for our precise video and count around about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon. And as soon as it was up, we got a press release went out to 60 different journalists and organisations, including Sky, including STV, including all the BBC Scotland people, to say, here's the count, here's the video, you can count them for yourselves if you want. And, well, did it work or not? As far as we can see, 2 newspapers, which is to say the Daily Record's Sunday edition and the Herald Sunday edition, they ran with the 20,000 lie, unfortunately. All the other papers that we saw were silent on the matter. Sky News and STV, unfortunately, went with the 20,000. And I've heard somebody say that they also heard BBC claim it was 20,000. So that's very unfortunate that those 3 main broadcasters would continue to misrepresent in that way. Anyway, we at A Force for Good, we wrote a letter to the Record and we wrote a letter to the Herald setting them straight, and hopefully that letter may at least appear in the forthcoming Sunday editions. But we certainly have done what we can, and we have created an alternative narrative, which happens to be a truthful narrative. And we were getting all the usual complaints from people saying, I was on the march and it lasted for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, not 27 minutes. And we have to respond and say, yes, it takes you 2.5 hours to walk the route, but it only takes you 27 minutes to pass a specific point in the route. So when we say it lasted for 27 minutes, we mean it took 27 minutes to pass our counting point. It didn't take you 27 minutes to walk from Kelvingrove Park down to Glasgow Green, unless you're Batman or something like that, which I can assure you most of the folk on that march were not. So, that is an important point to note. 3,726 on that Scottish Nationalist March. And of course it matters. It matters so much, because otherwise these things get written into history. The All Under One Banner people have never, ever, ever had 20,000 or anything close to it on any of their marches, even though they will claim that they've had 100,000 or even 250,000. And again, all the fantasy figures were in this magazine that we published, but you can also find the link, which we'll put up, that you can find in the thread, which was the fantasy figures versus the reality of all the marches. And it is eye-opening. It really is eye-opening. And why the media don't make this a story is a question that's worth asking, because sometimes it does sound like they have an agenda just to promote the fantasy. I hope that they don't, but sometimes after a while you have to begin to wonder, is this their deliberate agenda to go with the exaggerated 5 times figures instead of the actual truth, to go with 20,000 instead of less than 4,000? Interesting. Tell us what you think. Gary says he was at the coronation party at George Square, more about that in a moment, and was a little disappointed with the turnout. Don't get me wrong, the ones that turned out had a blast. I just wish it was attended by more people. Well, it could just simply have been at an awkward time. We couldn't have it earlier in the day because everybody was watching the coronation, and we didn't want to have it on the Sunday or Monday because by then the buzz could have just been going out. So we chose that time at 5 o'clock on a Saturday, but it's difficult to get into the centre of Glasgow now. That's also one thing, Gary, and it's going to get harder because the new ULEZ restrictions are coming in on the 1st of June, and that's going to ban a lot of cars from Glasgow city centre. So if they're not careful, it's going to become a dead area. It really is. It's never fully recovered from 2020, 2021. It's never fully recovered. And the SNP and Greens are doing everything they can to keep private cars out and to keep taxis out as well. Because a lot of these taxis don't comply with the new laws that are coming in. So goodness knows what it's going to be like during the summer. Anyway, massive thanks to everybody who did come out, and let's go on to that now. Let's bring up some pictures here of our coronation celebration in George Square. And at the height of the action, we had about 45 people who were there, and you won't see these pictures on TikTok, I'm afraid. You need to go to youtube.com/UK A Force for Good. But we had the flags there, we had Royal Standards, we had the Lion Rampant, we had Saltires, we had Union Jacks, and we had King Charles flags, and a really good mix of people. Okay, there you go. That's just general pictures. That's the cenotaph in George Square. Okay, and that's a nice picture that was taken by Billy Knox. That's one of his photographs. Billy Knox Photography. Check him out on Facebook. A popular photographer here in Glasgow, and that worked out well. That was our 14 posters. Made a nice. That should have really been on the front page of newspapers, and hey, it might be still one of these days. Okay, that's another angle. The big flag there on the big flagpole towards the right, that's the Royal Standard that's the United Kingdom Royal Standard as used in Scotland. Okay, there you go. That's a good one with the Lion Rampant and Saltire in the background. And there's another one. I quite like that one. That's a colourful one. Okay, there we go. Okay, and then what we did was, after we had that line up, I brought along 3 bottles of English champagne, and we had little Union Jack cups that we gave to everybody, and we burst open the Union Jack, the champagne. Let's go to the video of me doing that, actually, of popping a champagne bottle. Let's play that video. And I did that with a second bottle as well, and then everybody got a little sip, like feeding the 5,000. Everybody got a sip of champagne in the plastic cup, and then we toasted King Charles for a long and happy reign, and that's us saying 3 cheers there. Okay, There you go. That was some people who came by and joined in with us. There you go. The girl on the left there's got Charlie's Angels. There was 3 of them with those t-shirts, which is very nice. Very nice indeed. Okay. That's a good one. That's a colourful one. There you go. I like that one as well, because that chap and myself were both wearing the same t-shirt from Primark. Okay. A couple of our fantastic AFFG ladies with the Lion Rampant and a saltire. Okay. And then at the end, the whole thing lasted for about an hour and 15 minutes. And then at the end, we lined up there for some good photographs. And then we sang Land of Hope and Glory. And then God Save the King. Okay. So it was a nice event. And then afterwards, we went into town for 2 or 3 hours to enjoy each other's company. So very good evening, and very pleased about how it all went. And thank you so much to everybody who came out. There were some ladies who came down from Stirling, and there were a couple of gents who came up from Beath in North Ayrshire. A couple of ladies who came in from Kilwinning, and some others who were in the Glasgow area also. So thanks very much to everybody who came in. We created a scene and we had some great camaraderie. So thanks indeed for all of that. It's one of these things, if the media, for example, had been behind it, then they could have generated a lot of people there. But of course, we're dealing with our own limited resources and our own limited reach. And so we're tending mainly just to simply be able to reach out to those who already know of us. And also, of course, a lot of people were doing their own thing in that afternoon. And I know lots of people who are actually having their own garden parties with their friends and who weren't able to come in anyway. So I thank everybody who did come in. It was a great evening. Okay, now we've got a competition coming up just before our guest, who's on in 7 minutes. And the competition is for this little badge, of which we've got a limited supply. King Charles III Coronation. And you also get a free copy of Union of the Crowns as well. And we'll ask you a question after On This Day in British History, because British history matters. Because if we don't know where we've been, then we don't know where we are, and it's difficult to know where we might go as a consequence. So we always look for something that happened on this day in British history. And on this day in British history, a British explorer passed away. Interesting chap who's had his own degree of controversy in the recent past. And his name was, well, depends what name you want to go by, but he latterly went by the name Henry Morton Stanley, who's particularly interesting to us because he was elected to Parliament as a liberal unionist. As a liberal unionist in where exactly? In Lambeth North. In Lambeth North from 1895 to 1900, but it was on this day that he passed away in 1904. And he's, of course, famous for his search for Dr. David Livingstone on behalf of an American newspaper, I believe, because Livingstone hadn't been heard about. So the newspaper sent Morton Stanley to go and have a look for him. And when he met Livingstone, he reached out his hand and said, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." And that's what's gone down in history. And there's a statue was erected recently in Denbigh, which was his birthplace. And let's put up a picture of his statue. There you go. That's in the town centre in Denbigh, which is in North Wales. And back in 2021, there was some controversy about him, because that was the time when people were questioning statues and so on. And some people got it into their head that he wasn't absolutely perfect. And so the local council decided to have a vote, which is interesting, a vote from the local council and a referendum whether or not to keep the statue. And indeed, the community voted 4-1 for it to stay. That was back in 2021. Well, we've also got another picture here which was taken 5 years earlier. And this is a delegation from the Democratic Republic of Congo, led by the Charge d'Affaires, Madame Marie Nanga. And they came along in 2016. I'm not quite sure, was it for the unveiling of it, or I'm not sure, but she is quoted as saying, quote, this is Madame Nanga, "I do not have anything new to tell you except for what he means to the Democratic Republic of Congo. For us Congolese, when we read the history of our country, he isn't Sir Henry Morton Stanley, and even less so his birth name John Rowlands. For us he is Bula Matadi, which means breaker of rocks. He is the very man who had the extraordinary skill of being able to outline the present borders of the Democratic Republic of Congo." She added, "We come to express our gratitude for all the work that he accomplished in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and to invite you, his fellow citizens, to be proud of his heritage." And she added that school children in her country learned how he opened it up to the outside world and was instrumental in developing its railways. So that's Henry Morton Stanley, and that's his statue there in Denbigh. And perhaps if the people who took offence to the statue in 2021 had maybe looked back and listened to what Marie Nanga said 5 years earlier, then they might have taken a different point of view. But certainly a lot of people did listen to Marie Nanga, and they voted to retain the statue, which is very interesting. So that was on this day, the man who met Dr. Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley, passed away, and he's buried in Pirbright in Surrey, in the churchyard of St Michael and All Angels. Also Liberal Unionist MP. Good stuff. Now we'll ask you a question about that just in 30 seconds for this badge. Now folks, you'll stand a good chance of winning this badge if you haven't entered our competition before. What you need to do is send an email to contact@aforceforgood.uk, contact@aforceforgood.uk, and the first person to get the right answer will get this winging its way in the post to you tomorrow. Now in a minute we have got our friend Will Podmore coming up, Brexit author, after I've asked you this question. Here's the question, folks. Henry Morgan Stanley said something, I presume. What was it he said? To whom? Who was the person he was referring to? Who was the person Stanley was referring to in his famous quote? I hope that question was clear enough. Folks, we're about to bring into the studio Will Podmore. Now, Will Podmore is the author of Capability Britain for a Country That Works. This is a pro-Brexit book. We'll talk about it more when we speak to Will. He's also the author of Brexit, the road to freedom. Folks, please give a big AFFG welcome to Mr. Will Podmore. Hello, Will. Good evening to you.
Hello, Alistair. Very good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. You've been on our show a couple of times before, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the show and to pick your political brains on matters, on current political matters. And your big enthusiasm is Brexit. And are you able, in just a few words, to explain to our viewers why you got so animated with Brexit and why you believe that it was essential and remains essential?
Yes, I mean, it was originally a pro-Britain point of view. I mean, I campaigned in 1975 to keep us out of the European Economic Community at that time. And the reason was very largely that I always thought that decisions about what happened in a country should best be made by the people who live in that country rather than by some other people in some other place. And this doesn't just apply to Britain, obviously it applies, I think the French ought to make decisions about what happens in France and the Germans about what happens in Germany. Not that anybody should make decisions about what goes on in another country, because if you allow that to happen, it doesn't usually mean there's any kind of popular control going on. It means that some rather overbearing government is trying to take powers over another country. Now, whether that other country makes its own decisions or not should be up to that country, not to a foreign government, whether it be the Kaiser or Adolf Hitler or the people in Brussels. The same principle should apply, that the people of each country should make the decisions about what happens in that country. They may not make the right decisions, but it's far better that they make their own decisions, even if there are mistakes made, than that somebody else does it for them. And if you're a grown-up, you really should take the responsibility for, what happens to yourself and your country. I think, that we should control it, we should run it. The people of the country should have the dominant say in what happens in that country. Now, the fact, obviously, in Britain over the last few years, it got very messy. As you can see from the number of different prime ministers we've had in the last few years, it's been quite an unprecedentedly chaotic situation. Partly because, when Theresa May came in, she didn't really believe in Brexit. She campaigned against it, and most of her cabinet did as well. And she just really messed things up considerably. Then along came Boris, who almost fortuitously sort of ended up being for Brexit. But he looked a bit panic-stricken the day that he realised he'd been on the winning side. Do you remember his expression after the, after the night before? He really looked a bit like, oh my God, what have I done?
Yes,
so,
yes.
He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a clue. Cameron didn't. I mean, Cameron deliberately didn't create any plans. He didn't have any fallback plan B. He didn't come up with anything positive. He didn't tell the civil service to make any preparation. So naturally enough, everybody was going around the next day saying, what do we do now? And Boris was particularly perturbed, I think. I mean, he was very happy because he was in number 10, but he just didn't know what to do with it. I don't think, and I think the next few months just got more and more ropey and chaotic, and we haven't taken advantage of it. We haven't pushed for massive, good new projects. I mean, HS2 keeps on getting sabotaged and run down, whatever you think of it. I mean, if you're going to have a project, do it. Don't just sort of like say you're going to do it, then dig a few holes and put a few miles of track in, and then sort of say, oh, perhaps we won't do it after all. It's just like half-hearted. In the meantime, the Chinese would have built several different airports and put another 10,000 kilometers of rail track in, whereas we faff about and don't get things done. I'm not saying we should be like China. But a little bit of executive competence would be a very good thing.
But 100%, and that's something that we struggle for, at least recently in Britain, we've struggled for leaders with any kind of vision. And especially, and I'm not being party political here, but especially Conservatives seem to lack a lot of vision. I mean, they get in and it's like, well, what are you going to do other than, what's your plan to take forward now? And as you said there about both Cameron and Theresa May, none of them wanted anything to do with this Brexit if they could help it. And they had no plan to take any of that forward. And then Boris kind of ends up, as you put it, just the man who finds himself in that situation, and he's really got no immediate plans on how to capitalize upon it either, unlike for example people like yourself and others who have been thinking about this since, as you say, 1975, and thinking of the possibilities and thinking of the sorts of things that we could be doing instead. What would you, for example, if you were appointed to the cabinet as a non-party member, just as an advisor, what would be one or two of the first things that you would advise the British government to get on right away, as quickly as possible?
Well, this is controversial in certain circles, but I would say develop our energy industries. We've got oil and gas reserves. Well, I think they're quite useful sources of reliable, relatively cheap energy that we don't have to depend on, imports from France or Russia or Saudi Arabia or whatever. If we've got these reserves, these resources, we should put money in. If a private company puts money in, fine. If nobody puts private money in, put public money in. It's so important that we have kind of energy self-reliance.
100%. I am.
Somebody else will choke our energy sources, and it's not good news. So that would be one of the very first things. Another one would be to improve our supply of water, which is not terribly clean in lots of places. We have scandalous situations where sewage is pumped into rivers and onto our beaches. That really ought to be a very top priority to prevent that happening, whatever it takes. Again, the Environment Agency doesn't do very much. The water companies, at one point, Michael Gove pointed out, 95% of the profits water companies made went to the dividends, not into investment, not into improving storm outlets, not into building new pipelines or putting new plastic pipelines inside the old pipelines. It went out of the country usually because 70% of our water companies are owned by foreign owners. So the money didn't even come and stay into our economy. It just went out the door, and that's not terribly good for us, I don't think. So that's important. Transport's another one. We do need to have better links up and down the whole country, up into Scotland and across northern England, probably across Scotland as well. I don't know very much about the Scottish transport network, I'm afraid. But, in England, I had to travel recently from Lancashire to Yorkshire, and it was just appalling. The trains were like out of some kind of, 50s movie, and there was a couple of carriages. It was absolutely rammed full of people. And it only ran a few times a day, 2 or 3 times a day or something. How can you generate industrial growth when you can't even communicate across a very important west-east axis? Is there something similar in Scotland? I don't know.
Well, there's there's definitely transport links that can be improved and upgraded in Scotland, but unfortunately, transport is one of these things that's devolved to the incompetent Scottish so-called government. And when you've got the Greens involved in that, they're anti-vehicle and they're anti-transport, and they don't like the idea. I'm being prejudiced against the Greens, I suppose, here, but I think I'm being accurate. They don't want people travelling on roads if they can help it. So there's motorways that need to be upgraded and have needed to be upgraded for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're not getting upgraded because at the moment the Scottish Greens are putting the kibosh on it. But in
Yes.
England, you're absolutely correct about these huge infrastructure projects, especially improving the links around the north of England and even Scotland into the north of England. These sorts of areas can be improved as well, and that's something that a government should just come in and say, this is what we're going to be doing, and we're spending the money on it. And as you said there, the water and the oil and gas, and you know, again, the whole thing with the oil and gas is that you've got almost all the political parties now who are prejudiced against any kind of carbon development in that way,
Yeah.
which well, who knows where all that's going to end, but it's at the moment it's ending in it's giving us incredibly high prices for our energy resources, and it doesn't look like there's any solution available at the moment. But it's so easy, really, for us to get those solutions. So easy for us to do it if we just simply had the politicians that would grasp the nettle, but they don't, and that's what's the frustrating thing about living in Britain at the present moment, is just the paucity of talent in the political class. Whether that's going to change at the next general election, I don't know, but there's so much that can be done, but nothing is getting done, apart from just, and you have to wonder, that's why some people fall into sort of ideas about, oh, it's all Klaus Schwab's plan and stuff like that. And while I don't want to go down that route, you know, unless the government bucks up and starts improving itself, then everybody's going to be thinking, is there some hidden agenda here? You know, why can't you develop proper energy and water supplies in a first world country?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But you know, the Greens in Scotland have got the SNP by the throat, haven't they? More or less, because don't the SNP more or less rely on the Greens for their precarious parliamentary majority?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, from what I've heard about the Greens, they're not only against oil and gas, they're against nuclear. They want to close that down. It's an awful lot of jobs they're planning to waste, you know, as well as depriving the rest of us of cheap, reliable, secure energy supplies. The Greens are also, as Alistair said, that they're against any form of transport. Air travel, forget it. Ferries, no ferries. Oh, that's all right by the Greens. They're not worried if the SNP can't build the ferries that they promised. That's fine. Who needs ferries?
Yes.
You know, and you know, same with the roads. And also, then the Greens are also, I mean, across the board, they are just a disgrace. I mean, they oppose the monarchy. They try to, you know, insult the coronation. They are very much in favour of this terrible gender recognition reform bill, you know, which is like so anti-women and retrogressive. Actually, it's really very, very bad. And the Green ideology, as such, is not a force for progress. They claim it is, but it isn't. It depends on fantasy about what's going to happen around the corner. You know, it's fantasy that the seas are going to rise, you know, 20 meters, whatever Al Gore told us, you know, in the next few months, you know, whatever, you know, they just exaggerate vastly. You have a 2 or 3 millimeter rise in the sea level, and they just exaggerate. It's rather like Alistair was saying about the marches. You know, you get 3,000 something, and oh, it's 50,000. Well, you know, the sea level, you get 3 millimeters, and the next minute it's 5 meters. You know, it's like, you know,
it's almost like for them the truth doesn't matter as long as it serves an agenda to get people moving in a certain direction. They don't care about the actual relevant, the realness of the truth. Talking about Scottish politics, though, you wrote an article which I read here. It was Hot Air. Will Podmore takes issue with the empty rhetoric of a case for Scottish independence, and that was published on the 6th of February 2023 in the Morning Star. So that book was Scotland Rising, the Case for Independence by Gerry Hassan. That was your article there, your book review. What can you tell us about this book? What was the point of the book, and what was your thoughts on it? Because Gerry Hassan is a well-known Scottish nationalist commentator. He's got a weekly column in the National, and he's like many of these Scottish nationalist commentators. They're able to make a living by writing the same article week on week on week, and the only difference is they put the words in a different order.
Yeah, the same with his books. But my favourite story about Gerry is that in the run-up to the referendum in 2014, he tried to rig a debate on The World Tonight by emailing the programme's producer, asking her to exclude the well-known campaigner for Scottish unity with the rest of the country, Eddie Maguire, who's a good friend of mine, a good comrade, and also a very eminent composer. Now, unfortunately for Gerry, he rather clumsily copied his email to all the people who were invited, including to Eddie.
Fantastic.
Whoops, what an own goal, Mr. Hassan. And, the producer, all credit to her, took no notice of Hassan's somewhat undemocratic request, you might think. Anyway, coming back to his book, Scotland Rising, which is, as Alistair said, it's very much the same as his previous books. He, in this work of fiction or fantasy, to give him credit, he did actually put forward quite a few of the very good arguments for the Union. That there'd be a great financial hit if Scotland lost the benefit of the Barnett formula. There'd be a great risk in setting up a hard border. There'd be a great risk of losing the pound and joining the euro. There'd be a great loss of sovereignty involved in rejoining the EU. There'd be a loss of British identity. There'd be a rupturing of working class solidarity. And then you put all these very good arguments saying, these are all the risks that would happen if we separated off from the rest of Britain. And then there was a kind of big pause. And then he didn't answer any of them. He couldn't come up with any arguments back against all these points. So he really did, score another own goal there. And it's just really very poor. It claims to be a kind of work of political economy, and in fact, it's not effective at all. It is, as I say, a fantasy, a dream. In it, he does acknowledge again a bit of reality. He says, Scottish public opinion is not at a place where it is decisively in favour of another independence referendum. The belief in Scotland's right to decide its own future has not yet translated into widespread support for a second independence referendum. So he's acknowledging that the majority in Scotland want to stay in Britain, in the United Kingdom. If it was a genuine national liberation struggle, which is what this surgeon used to claim, then there'd be easily 70, 80, 90% support, which is what you tend to get in national liberation movements.
Yes.
In Africa, Asia, Latin America, Ireland, for goodness sake. But there's nothing remotely close to that in Scotland, even though, again, Ms. Sturgeon always claims there's a majority. But, again, she's just telling porkies it's not the case.
That's right. Yeah. Completely. You made the case as well in your book, Your Capability Britain for a Country That Works, which is available from Amazon or good booksellers, that very point about how, for example, the Supreme Court in Canada ruled upon whether Quebec was being oppressed, as it were, and whether they could claim indigenous rights under international law. And you pointed out what the Canadian Supreme Court said, which was basically none of those conditions exist in a first world country. Yeah. And that sort of human rights legislation is for countries that are visibly under the thumb of an external oppressor. And that was before the Supreme Court in Britain came to exactly the same decision last November, when they also ruled on that very matter, which had been brought before them, that the SNP didn't have a case for sovereign to break away under international law, because you can only do that under international law if you're genuinely oppressed. Although people like Gerry Hassan probably do convince themselves, and I can't speak for him, of course, but he does write sometimes as if he actually does believe that he is genuinely oppressed as a columnist in a national Scottish newspaper. I don't know who he imagines he is on that matter, but
even Alex Salmond said once that Scotland is not an oppressed country and has no need to be liberated.
Yes.
I don't know if he realised what he said when he said it, but he wrote it in the introduction to his big screed about how Scotland should be a separate country. But he actually acknowledged that it wasn't a viable proposition at all.
That's right. Yes, you're talking about the white paper, I think, that was released, that courtesy of the British taxpayer who paid for that, and the British Civil Service, who also was drafted in to write this massive 650-page work, which was irking as well. I just want to end with your words here from Capability Britain, Will. You say that and you're making the case for British independence here, for the British political community of people who identify with Britain. And you say, as an independent country, we can choose democratically how we run our country. When we elect a bunch of rascals, we can later kick them out. We can make our own decisions about policy, about how much the government should intervene in the economy. We can sell goods and services to those who want to buy them anywhere in the world, with no need for permission from politicians or the EU. We can unite our whole country behind a programme for progress. The national government, local authorities, our businesses and services must all plan to make a success of independence. People talk about the government running the country, but most of the time workers run the country. It is workers who run the NHS day in and day out, workers who keep the power lines humming, workers who drive the buses, trains, vans and trucks. The crucial challenge facing the working class is how to take control in the interests of the people of Britain. The unavoidable conclusion for workers is that they must wrest control for themselves. Well, that's absolutely the case, and let's hope that enough of us workers can see the plans that you've been putting out for United Britain and for an industrial, progressive, democratic one as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would urge people to get Capability Britain for a Country That Works. This was published in 2021, and your earlier book was published just after Brexit in 2018. Brexit the Road to Freedom. Good stuff. Well, it's 5 to 8. The 25 minutes has gone in very quickly. Thank you very much for all your considered comments. You've got a lot to say, and I'm glad to say that you've written it down in your books. And any more books in the can?
Actually, not at the moment.
No.
But more reviews and articles and letters. I write letters to our local paper, the Ilford Recorder, which generously quite often printed, including ones about the necessity for having a united Britain. You know, the absolute folly of splitting our country into pieces. Partition is not good for countries. The SNP's programme is destructive and not to be given any mercy, really. We really ought to be, when they're down, and I think they are quite down at the moment, it's quite a good time to keep pressing them down.
Yes, that's what I like about your writing as well, is you emphasise something that's not emphasised enough, is about how the working class in Britain need to identify together, because under a separate England and a separate Scotland, you would have all these, you'd have Scottish unions fighting with English unions, Scottish shipyards and so on fighting with the English and so on. At least within a concept of the United Kingdom, you can bring it together as much as is possible within our islands. Well,
particularly the defence industry. It's very important that we have elements of the defence industry, in all parts of our country. Because we need a strong, effective defence industry at the core of our manufacturing industry.
100%, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much for all the work that you've done, and thank you for coming on tonight. And we'll definitely have you back on again. And
Indeed,
good stuff.
Thank you very much. I
good stuff.
appreciate that. I look forward to that.
Susie says, I'll hunt out those books. They look interesting. And Catherine says, thank you, Will. Great chat. And Christopher says, thank you for all your contributions here, Will. And Stuart says, great stuff. So, good stuff, Will. We'll speak to you again. Have a good night.
Look forward to that. And well done, everybody at Force for Good. You really are a great credit to our whole nation. Thank you so much for all you do, all of you.
Thank you, Will. Good night.
Good night.
Fantastic. Will Podmore. Gary says, brilliant wee podcast. Lovely. Glad to have you on, Gary. And thank you for coming along to the event on Saturday night. That was very good. Excellent. Now, where are we? Do we have a winner, I wonder, for our badge? We'll look into that. Debbie says, lovely bloke. Harry says some good stuff there. Gary says he's definitely coming back. We don't have a winner tonight, is the answer. Nobody got the answer correct. The answer was David Livingston. That might have just been the way that I messed up the question, asking the question. I'm sorry about that, folks. I'm sorry about that if I did. So we'll roll it over to next week. We'll roll it over to next week. Where are we? Can we just move that comment? And what else we've got? British Legends liked it and liked the chat. Good. Folks, it just remains for me to say we will be back next week when we also have another guest, and we're getting guests in all the time now. I hope you like that format. Always remember, of course, our wee book for the Union. This really helps us keep going. If we can sell these, if we can sell several of these every month, then we're able to keep rolling on every month. These are our best sellers, along with the various badges and things like that that can be found at our shop, which is at aforceforgood.uk/shop-1. And we really do depend upon that, folks. So just check stuff out there and you will not be disappointed. And if there's things that you'd like to see us sell, please do suggest. If there's guests that you'd like to have on, please do suggest them as well, and we'll see what we can do. Okay, folks, hope you've enjoyed the show tonight. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.